Hello and welcome to this video about Gotharman's zaTurn modular synthesizer. It is a modular synthesizer, so it comes with modules that you can patch. Like a traditional analog modular synthesizer, this is of course mostly digital, but it also has real analog filters in there to get, an analogish sound. When you order a zaTurn, you can even specify what kind of filters you want to have installed in this device, because there are several ones and they each have different characters, of course. Before we dive into patching and how this thing works, let me just list a couple of features that this awesome device has. So apart from being a modular synthesizer and having analog filters, you can also load samples on there via a USB thumb drive. You can also export samples that you created on the device. You have a wavetable editor, so you can even draw wave shapes on the screen. And of course it has a stereo audio input that you can use to sample audio. It can also resample itself, of course, and it can mangle those samples with granular effects. But apart from sampling, it also has oscillators. It has special drum oscillators if you want to do drum synth design. You have digital filters, you have LFOs, random sources, and so on. So there's a lot of things that you can do. And this is just, the sound design portion. There's also a bunch of sequences in there. They can have up to 64 steps, but each of the 8 different sequencer tracks can have their own length and start point and subdivision. It also has MIDI input and output, so you can sequence external gear. There are also 16 controller tracks that send MIDI CC data, or that can be used as internal modulation sources. So yeah, there's just so much functionality packed into this device that it can really keep you busy for quite a while. I've had this for a couple of weeks. I'm deep into Gotharman instruments. If you know my YouTube channel, you've probably seen a bunch of videos already. Some jams I've already posted about this one, but there's also lots of other videos about the Urano, which is the bigger brother, which also has CV inputs and outputs and a little different structure. There's also the Little Deformer 3, which is basically the flagship groove box of Gotharman, the space drum, the drum machine, and so on. So yeah, check out some other videos as well. But in this video for now, let's focus on the new zaTurn. What makes the zaTurn actually stand out in the Gotharman lineup right now is that it is a modular synth like the Urano, but it's also polyphonic. And of course it's a smaller size, which I think is really good because I'm going to be traveling a lot next year, so I can take that with me more easily. And it still has that modular synthesizer functionality that I really like, of course. But let's dive right in now. I've loaded a new preset, and a new fresh preset usually has only a simple synth voice patch so that you can hear something when you press the keyboard on the touchscreen. Okay, nothing spectacular, but it's a base to work with. You can also change that touchscreen keyboard to split it up into 3 octaves. You can pitch it up or down. So yeah, that's very cool to not only use it as a sound preview tool, but also actually to enter notes into the sequencer like that. And you can even, with this Polytouch version that has a new screen, use it for polyphonic play. And for this, I'm just gonna go into the trigger menu, set the play mode to poly, and then I can even play some simple chords. Now, the zaTurn is 4-voice polyphonic, and that means that you have those voices A, B, C, and D, and they can either be the same sound, so that you can, play proper chords with up to 4 notes, all playing the same sound, or they can be unlinked, so each of those 4 voices can have a different sound, and you can still play polyphonically, but then each of your fingers will have a different sound. Or you can use those 4 voices monophonically, and then you have 4 just different voices like, a lead synth and a drum sound. Now, each voice actually has 2 parts, or it can be split up in any way into 2 parts, which means there are 2 sequences per voice. And that means, depending on how you patch your different voices, you can have up to 8 tracks, 8 sequencer tracks, each sequencing an individual sound. But those 2 parts in A, B, C, and D, they all share one set of modules. So basically, it is 4 modular synthesizers in this box. And for each modular synthesizer, you have 2 sequencer tracks. If that's too complicated right now, it doesn't matter. Let's have some fun with it now. I'm not going to use this new preset. I'm going to load a clear preset that I did myself where nothing is patched. So this is completely empty and I have to do the connections. And I'll use this to show you how patching works. If you already know about Gotharman's Urinal synthesizer, then patching will be not much different actually. So I'll go into the edit menu again. And here we can see the current part number. That is part 1. We have 8 parts and parts 1 and 2 are part of voice A, 3 and 4 are B, and then C, and then D. And so in part 1 we have those modules, but we can also go to the overview page, which lists the modules again, plus several sources like, keyboard values or sequencers. There are also triggers or patch points that you can use to, connect those 4 modular synthesizers in there into one big modular synthesizer. So this overview is actually quite handy also to do our first patching. Now, to hear something, we need to patch something to the stereo output. And we have 2 output modules for this voice number A. So let's select output 1 and choose an input. We simply select input, and then let's say we want to have oscillator 1 as an input. Now, we don't hear anything yet because we haven't turned up the attenuator. And there are several ways to do this. I'm just going to click module now, which will jump into the output menu. So this is our part output. We see that input is set to oscillator 1, what we just selected, and there's also sound coming in, but we haven't increased the level yet. So let's do that. The knobs on screen correspond to the edit knobs here, and they go in a zigzag arrangement. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 in the top row, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the bottom row. I'm just going to turn that down real quick and jump into another menu. So we don't want to have a droning sound. So let's add a VCA between oscillator 1 and the output. So let's go to VCA 1, and we could of course patch, input oscillator 1 into that, and then we go to output and patch VCA into that, but there's also a different way. We just select VCA 1, go into the module page, and then we can actually place this module between other modules. I'll simply hit place, and it'll ask me place module after. And now we've connected oscillator 1 to output 1, and we want to place it after oscillator 1. So, place it in the chain. I'll just press oscillator 1. That's it. And now when I go back to the menu and to input, we see that input 1 is oscillator 1 now. And when we go out into our output module that's connected to our stereo output, we see that we don't have oscillator 1 in there anymore, but VCA 1. So we successfully inserted VCA 1 into that signal chain. Of course, this doesn't do anything because we haven't assigned the VCA and the oscillator a keyboard or a sequencer yet. So let's do that with VCA 1. We have a trigger that is currently off, so nothing really triggers that VCA that also has, an ADSR envelope. But this envelope is not being triggered at all. So bottom row, first knob, that's this one. Again, Z, 1, 2, 3, 4. First row, 1, 2, 3, 4. Second row. So when I turn this knob up, we can actually select anything as a trigger. We can not just trigger it, with a sequencer, but we can also trigger it with a sample and hold or an LFO or anything really. But for now, let's choose trigger 1. And trigger 1, that is the trigger or gate output of the sequencer number 1 that is corresponding to this voice. So now we just need to do the same with our oscillator. And what you can also see here now, that we have assigned this connection to a part or to a sequencer, we can also see all the modules that are used in this patch lit up in green. And the brown one is the module we're currently selecting. Let's go to oscillator 1, hit module. So now we're in this menu, and we also have a trigger option here. So this defines where the pitch information for this oscillator comes from. And we can choose between off or sequencer 1 or sequencer 2. Like I said, each of those voices comes with 2 sequencer tracks. So yeah, let's just say this is sequencer 1, which means now that sequencer 1 will send pitch information to oscillator 1 and gate or trigger information to our VCA. And this means now that if we increase our output volume again, can you hear something? We've patched a very simple synth voice going from oscillator to VCA to our output. Now let's see what we can actually do with those modules. I'm going to go to the oscillator 1 again. We have several options here. We can tune the module, of course, in semitone steps or even in cent steps. And then we have a waveform, a continuous waveform knob. And this is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, this third knob here. And when I change it, we can also see that the waveform preview here changes. And when I hit a key, we can preview that. There's also a pulse width parameter. And this allows us to properly change the sound. Now, what you might have noticed already is that whenever I move the knobs and they're at a different position than the knobs on screen, the values will just jump to what the knob value is. So let me demonstrate this. I'm just going to turn this around. And now the edit knob 3 is set fully clockwise, but the wave parameter is a little right of 12 o'clock. So as soon as I move this, it'll jump to where my knob position is. You can change that. You can also have it stay where it is, and then you have to, move the knob to that position, and then it will catch up, which is better for live performances, so you don't have value jumps. But for sound editing, I think this is a lot quicker because you don't really have to pay attention to those on-screen knobs. You just, set your physical knob to where you want, and it'll automatically jump there. Okay, so that is pretty cool. We have some weird waveform, but it's too static, of course. So let us patch an LFO and modulate our pulse width parameter. This we can do in the modulation page, and those menus are usually structured the same way for each module. So it doesn't matter if you're into the oscillator module, in the VCA module, or something else. You will usually have a main page like this, and then you'll have 1 or 2 modulation pages where you can patch modulation sources to certain parameters. Now, to patch a modulation source to the pulse width parameter, we can simply use our edit knob here, and we can scroll through all the other modules that we have in this voice. Let's choose an LFO for now, LFO 1, and then increase the amount. So now we've added modulation. It's very simple, but there's also another method. Let's switch that to off and turn the amount off and exit out of this menu into the overview screen. Now, we know that the pulse width parameter is parameter number 3 on the modulation page. So when we know our way around this synth, we can actually patch this right here from this overview screen. For this, we will simply select oscillator 1, which is already selected, and then choose modulation, and then choose LFO 1 for modulation slot 3. And then we go back into the module page, and you can see that we have now selected LFO 1. So this is also a quick way to just, route several different sources into several destinations. Of course, this means also that you have to know your way around. Like I said, there are different modules a little bit, but this actually comes quite quickly. But either way, I don't use one or the other method really all the time. It just depends where I'm at and what I'm doing. And I really like that there are so many different ways of patching. So I think everybody really finds their own preference. Okay, so let's dial up the amount again. That is the third from the bottom row, 1, 2, 3. So this one. We could also have dialed that up in the overview screen, of course. But now we have the modulation, which we already listened to. Cool. Maybe before we continue with the sound design, let's enter a sequence so that we don't always have to press, the keyboard keys to preview the sound. to get to the sequencer, we press the sequence button here. And now, again, we're still on part 1. We have note tracks and controller tracks. We also have a sequencer main menu where we can have global parameters like, the last step or the resolution or subdivision. We can have a metronome, or we can also have a BPM value that we can adjust. This is global, the BPM, but each sequencer track can have a different subdivision. Let's go to the note tracks. And here we have a typical sequencer view. Now we can enter gates, or when the note or the sound should play. We can also do that with the steps down here. We can enable and disable steps. And we can also, switch through the bars, because there are up to 64 steps. But yeah, you can also do the same with the touch screen. And then to enter notes, you can also see the notes values here. They are by default on C4. We can just, draw stuff in like that. And when we press the play button here now, we have a crazy melody that is not very musical, but it's a melody. We can, of course, draw this with our fingers, but we can also use knobs mode. We have 8 knobs, so we can now assign those 8 bar graphs, those 8 notes to the 8 knobs. And we can, for example, use knob 3 to precisely dial in a MIDI note for this step, and do the same for this, and so on. There's also an all mode where we can use, knob 1 to transpose the whole sequence. But in the non-knobs mode, we have the 2, 3, and 4 knobs mapped to the bar, so we can scroll through our different bars. We have the last step, which can be, like I said, up to step 64, and anything between 1 and 64. Let's leave it at 16 though. And we have a resolution, so how quick the sequence plays in comparison to the clock or to other sequences. To help us a little with our sequencer programming, we also have a template screen. When we press the TMP button, it will overlay over our note value screen this template screen, and we could, for example, use the edit knob 5 here to set a scale. So all of the notes that we enter will just be nudged into a certain scale that, of course, helps us stay into a certain, musical way when we program our sequences with our finger like that. But we can also do fun things like, add random steps, for example. For this, I'm just going to quickly go out and just delete all of those steps. There's, of course, also a clear function. And then I go back to the template screen, and then I can set a range, basically probability. Let's say 50% maybe, and 49. Press random steps, and now it has given us, at a 49% chance, random triggers in there. We can also do the same with note values. So we can say, okay, let's give us 100% range note values randomly. And now we have a weirdly random track. We can also say, just go back to the middle. So we press middle, and then everything is at E4. And by dialing down this range, we can affect what those buttons do, we can affect the strength of what those buttons do. So at 15% random, we'll just have, 15% deviations from that initial value that we were on. So there are a lot of things you can do there with the sequencer. You can have, ramp up or ramp down, and, put that on top of your random stuff and so on. So this is really cool if you just, have a basic sequence entered and then want to create some variations of that. So let's play this. Okay, this sounds a lot better than what we had before already. We can go to the modulation page there. We can also transpose the whole sequence up or down. So let's transpose it down 1 octave. Okay, and there's also a probability. So this is at the maximum value, which is 511. And we can turn that down. So this is roughly 50% now. So now each step will have a 50% chance of being played or just muted. It won't be skipped, but it will be muted. So it will stay in sync, but it won't play all the notes all the time. So this is cool, to just add some spice or randomness to your sequences. You can also modulate a parameter. For example, you can have the note value modulated by, any of the modulation sources. You can set up also sample and holds like random generators. Of course, you can have LFOs, you can have knobs, whatever, to modulate note or the gate length. There's a delay and so on. So yeah, lots of modulation options here. There are also other sequences or other tracks inside this sequencer, like a gate track where you can set the note length. You also have velocity data that you can change for each note, that you can map as a modulation source to any parameters that you like. There's also a position and subposition track where you can shift the notes around. This is a little more complex. I've got a video about the Gotharman sequences on my YouTube channel. I'll link to that in the description, where I'll go through those different sequencer modes, because they're actually quite fun. You can also do per step swing on that kind of stuff. So yeah, definitely check out that video. Okay, so let's continue with some more patching. Now, as you remember, we have just a simple digital oscillator going into a VCA and then to the output. We have an LFO modulating our wave parameter, but it's still a little too harsh sounding. So let's add a voltage controlled filter and analog a VCF to that mix. I'm just going to press VCF, go to the menu, and then hit place and place it after my VCA. Now, of course, you can place the VCF before the VCA, between oscillator 1 and the VCA. But now let's just place it between the VCA and our output, just for fun. That's it. Go back to the module. We see on the input side, VCA 1 is connected. It also automatically increases the level to 50% so that you can hear something. And then we have a nice analog filter effect. And I've got the Gotharman filters installed in this device, and each filter has, or each of the 4 voices filters has a low pass filter and also a band pass filter. There are 2 in parallel, so I can have fun effects like just, emphasizing the low notes, or the low frequencies, by dialing down the low cut. But then I also have a band pass, with which I can add high frequencies. And of course we have resonance. And of course we can modulate all of those parameters. We go to the modulation page, and then we have 2 slots for low pass and band pass cutoff. And then on modulation page 2 we can also modulate the resonance and some other fun stuff actually. So let us choose another LFO for low cutoff. We used LFO1 for the wave parameter, so let's use LFO2 for the low pass. We just dialed in that, and then for the bandpass cutoff, let's use a sample and hold, a random generator. We haven't set up these sample and holds yet, so let's do that right now. I'll exit, go into the sample and hold menu. Like I said, I can also do this here with sample and hold, but we also have those menus here, sample and hold. And we have 2 of those, each with an input. By default, that's noise, because that's how you would set up random generators in a modular synth usually, but you can also sample anything else that you have inside the device. You can even sample external audio. But yeah, let's stick with noise. And then we need to have a trigger that samples this value and passes it on. And as trigger 1, let's just use actually trigger 1. So whenever our sequencer or our keyboard is playing a note, it will sample the noise and use that as a value. So when we go back, out and into the VCF, we have the sample and hold set up here, and every time I press a key now, the value changes randomly. I'm just going to hit play, and let's see what came out of that modulation patching. Okay, cool. So the VCA that we set up is pretty boring. Let's add a little bit of release. Dial down the sustain. I'm gonna increase the low pass cutoff a little bit, the initial. low pass cutoff, which is modulated by LFO2. Okay, let's have a look at the LFOs real quick. We have four LFOs per voice. So voice A has 4, voice B has 4, and so on. Now, we use LFO2 for the filter, and we can actually slow that down a little bit. We have a preview here as well also. We can change the wave, just like we can change an oscillator waveform into various different things here. But let's stick to the standard triangle wave. We can also adjust the curve, so we can make it more exponential or logarithmic. We can also have the LFO trigger something, like a note. But yeah, let's just leave it at a slow rate. We can also modulate the rate, of course. We have AM modulation as well. And yeah, let's switch to LFO1 though, and make that a little bit faster. That's the wave parameter. Okay, cool, that's starting to sound like a fun synth voice already. Okay, as the last thing for this sound, let's add an effect. We can go to the effects menu. We have 2 effects per voice. Again, let's go to effects 1 and then place it after our VCF. So our signal chain is now oscillator 1 going into the VCA, into VCF, into the effects, and to the output. Again, on the input screen, VCF1 is set up. And now on the select screen, we can select one of many different effects. And let's choose the variator, which is a granular effect. On the effect screen, we can set that up. And I'm just going to hit play so that we can hear something and hear how the effect can change our sound. First of all, we switch it on. Then we have a mix or a wet dry parameter. So this is like a granular pitch shifting delay almost. I'm going to dial down the mix a little further, and I'm going to set the pitch to something close to the middle so that it doesn't, rise or fall too quickly. Okay, yeah, that sounds pretty fun. Okay, let's exit into the main screen real quick. We've been working on a clear preset, and we need to save that, of course. If we change something in the preset, there's a little asterisk here, and that means that we should probably save it. And let's check out the function buttons now, because so far we've also only used the touchscreen. But there's a lot we can do here as well with the physical controls. I'm going to press the function button so that it's lit, and that means that those buttons will take me to the menus written above them. So I can go to save it into the same slot, and then, enter whatever, let's say just demo, and that's it. I can also use those function buttons now to go into the sequencer menu, for example. Pressing it once goes to the global menu, pressing it twice goes to our note value menu. So this is very easy, just 2 clicks to go to the sequencer. And when I go to an oscillator, I just press the modules button, and then everything that's written below the buttons here is active. So to go to the oscillator, I'm just hit it, and we're there. Go to the voltage control filter, just hit this one, VCA, this one. And then, I can cycle through the pages by just pressing them again. So this is really cool, and it's very easy to get used to this functionality. You can also, like I said, press the parts button to enter your steps, like a traditional groovebox, step sequencing. And there are some other tricks in here as well. Let's exit out again. We can also use the function button for that. And then let's set up this currently just monophonic patch that uses voice A with part 1 as a polyphonic patch. This is very easy, luckily. We can set the voice from gate to poly. And now, whenever I press a key, a different voice will sound, and you have some bar graphs here which voices are currently active. Okay, voice 2, voice 3, voice 4, voice 1. The other ones don't contain any sounds yet, so we don't hear them. But we can easily copy the sounds from one part or from one voice to another. Generally, you just press the function button and then press copy. It'll ask you some stuff, but you just press copy again. And then we can switch to our parts 3 and 4, which are part of the second voice, voice B, simply by holding part and selecting 3 or 4. We also see that here on screen, and then the paste button is lit, which means we can paste something here. Let's just do that. It'll ask us from group 1. Yes, we want to have the sound from our group 1 pasted here, so just do that again. Then go to group C, do this again, and D, do this again. And now we switch to our first part, which we set up to polyphonic. And we have a polyphonic track. Now, of course, when we change our sound, it will only change for that voice that we're currently editing it. But, of course, Gotharman thought of that. So when we want to change the waveform for all of the parts, we just simply hit the link button, and it will now change this wave parameter for all parts at the same time. So we can just dial it up. And all parts will just follow. So this is now a proper polyphonic modular synth that you can just, edit on one part and then link the other parts, and they will just stay the same like that. And of course, we can also record things polyphonically, even with the on-screen keyboard. And for that, let's go to the sequencer real quick and hit erase. And so it erased our track that we entered earlier. And let's just live record something. To live record, I'm just going to hit the metronome button so that it's on while we're recording. Now we can hear it, and then I'll just press play. It'll give me 2 bars of count in. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. I go out of record mode. Okay, that's pretty low, but we also transposed our sequence earlier. And now we've got a polyphonic sequence running. So yeah, very simple, as you can see, and a lot of fun actually. And what you can also see is that it's only using the first part of each of the voices, so 1, 3, 5, and 7. So we could still use those 4 voices, but the other parts to program some drums or a second set of polyphonic sounds actually. So this allows you to create very complex patches, and we have only really just touched the tip of the iceberg for everything. So as a last thing that I want to demonstrate, let's check out the morphing feature. Now, morphing can happen for the sound or for the sequencer. And in order to get there, we would have to copy everything that we've programmed on this layer to the second layer and then change it so that we can morph between 2 similar sets of sounds. To do this, we simply go function, copy, and then we press the morph button. And this will copy our layer A, which we just programmed, onto layer B. And so when I hit play and turn the morph knob up for the audio or for the sound parameters, nothing changes because those 2 layers are the same now. But I could now, while I'm in the morph mode, while this button is lit, I'm editing layer B, I could change the waveform to this. And I could also go into the VCF and turn up the resonance even higher. Yeah, I want to link, of course, all of those voltage controlled filters that we have in the polyphonic setup. Okay, And this now sounds a lot thinner than what we initially programmed on layer A. Now, when I move the morph knob, it will morph between all of those parameter changes. So this is really cool to add variation to your performance. Like I said earlier, you can morph between two very different sets of sound parameters and completely change how everything feels timbre-wise. And the same can be done with the sequencing. So let's go to the sequencer. And yeah, maybe let's just transpose the layer B sequence by an octave. Let's exit out of there, hit play. And now morph the sequence from what we have here to one that is transposed. So it will smoothly transpose the sequence now, and when I'm totally clockwise, it will have transposed it by 12 semitones. Both together. Okay, and like I said, just the tip of the iceberg. You can create some really wild morphing situations here. You can also automate those morph knobs with an LFO so that they always move. You can override them. There's like tons of stuff in there that I can't really show you right now because it would just take too much time. But I would really encourage you to tell me what else you would like to see with this device in the comments below this YouTube video, so that I can either answer questions down there or film another video specifically for those features. So yeah, comment below, subscribe if you like this kind of content, and yeah, see you very soon in another Gotharman zaTurn video. Thanks a lot for watching, and have fun!